Hello, I'm Kathleen Snyder, and welcome to Backstage Antiques. This week on Backstage Antiques, we are going to examine Japanese art in the forms that are readily available in the market. Joining me this evening is Joe Keller of Toby House of Oak Park. Joe is an avid collector and probably one of the finest show dealers in the country. Thank you for being with me tonight, Joe.
Well, it's my privilege, Kay. I thought in discussing Japanese art, one of the first things a person should learn a little bit about is their history, and it enables you to understand the art. And Japan for many years was an island nation cut off from the rest of the world. They were ruled by an emperor who did allow the Spanish and Portuguese to establish missions there and establish Christianity around 1500. And there was an insurgency, and a new power came in called the Shogun, and he ruled Japan for 260 years. And under the Shogun, with the help of his samurais, they killed off something like 60,000 Christians in a matter of 2 days and expelled all the foreigners from the land. And the only people that he had any contact with were the Chinese and the Koreans, and a little island off Japan occupied by a few Dutch who did, manage to take some of the things out. So their culture developed without any Western influence up to around 1860, at which time the Shogun was overthrown, the Mikado came back to power, and abolished the samurai. So a lot of the art that we're going to discuss today that is available on today's market is art that was made for the Western world, has found its way here as imports from 1860 on. Now, much of the older Japanese art was never signed. The artists were not allowed to put their work on because they worked for a lord and all their work was his, and he did not want their name, so anything signed is after that. Now, in their culture, the Japanese, one of the very important things in Japanese culture that helped with the development of their art was their tea ceremony. Now, in that, they developed all the tools, and this piece that you're reaching for there is this is a hibachi. Now, this was used in the tea ceremony. We put in charcoal and build a fire and would heat the hot water. Now, the host for the ceremony was quite a ritual thing, but he would take this little cup. It was a very valuable thing to a Westerner. It would be worth nothing. It wouldn't look like anything. But he would put powdered tea and grind it up and sip from it and then pass it to one, and each one, after he drank, would pass it back. And when they get through with all the tea, they would sit around admiring the teapot and the cup. But anyhow, so this development of teapots and hibachis and the instruments that they used for the ceremony were very important. And when Japan was opened up to the Western world, they found out that we weren't all enthralled with tea ceremonies. So they went on to develop into other different forms of metalwork that we liked and were westernized, such as you have pieces over there, which this is a form of metalwork the Japanese did for export. It's champleve. Now, champleve, as you may be aware, is just a hollowed out piece of bronze metal and filled with enamel, and strictly for decorative. Now, this was probably a candlestick that might have been an altar piece or sent over here even for use in a home. And this, again, is the same type of work in champleve, and I turn it around there. I think it's a very beautiful piece.
I think this is the teague dog that was used in some of the ceremonies.
Yes.
In the 17th and 18th centuries.
Yeah, now this piece is probably really late 19th century, like I said, yes, because most of the things that come in were not. And they did a lot of the champleve work, particularly 1890 to 1900. And some of these things they're getting scarce today.
Could you tell us something about the beautiful iron piece? I can't.
Well, another part of let me get that. Another part of the Japanese culture, you have to understand the Japanese people. They loved nature and the forms of nature. They loved flowers, and flower arranging was a big thing with them. And they're famous for their Japanese gardens,
with the goldfish and
their gardens. This was out of a Japanese garden. This is cast iron, representing the drift piece of driftwood with the two young turtles crawling up it and the lily pads coming out. And this probably set in a miniature Japanese garden. And
Turn this around a little bit.
Yeah.
Get a few shots of it. It's very attractive. Just flowing, very, very graceful.
But this is another part of their culture that occupied a lot of their art form, in that they made beautiful vases, but they did not get them over decorated because they wanted the flowers to be the thing. And that's why much of their art form changed after 1868, because we like, I think, sometimes gauche things. We like gold and we like everything to be, you know, and don't appreciate the same things that they did. So that
well, the Japanese have so revered their artists that they, I think there was a program on Channel 11 about the national treasures, and they have about 20 people that are living treasures of Japan.
Yeah, they're supported by the government, and their work is to continue. Now, one thing the Japanese artists did I thought was most unusual is that a lot of Japanese only have one name.
Yes.
Their name might be Joe, and maybe Joe goes to work for a master craftsman in making metalwork, and he learns this craftsmanship, and when he takes over for the master, he adopts the surname of the master, so that you have one name. You can see the same name as an artist, you know, for 300 years, and you wonder, well, I mean, it can't be the same man, but it's always, this name is passed on from one to the next as he's replaced and he trains a new worker. So that sometimes you'll see a name like Kinko-san who worked, and his name may, you know, you say, how can he work 200 years? But he did.
Oh, that's amazing.
But now the thing I have noticed too about a lot of the Japanese pieces, that they tend to dramatize nature in the way they find it, and even in a lot of their carvings, rather than in mythology. They don't use as much mythology as the Chinese did. See, most of their art forms were, I'll have to explain, they copied the Chinese and the Koreans, but not because they wanted to imitate them for resale to anybody else, to pass it off as Chinese work, because they loved the work that the Chinese did. The time that Marco Polo returned to Europe and the Europeans were seeking Chinese porcelains, so were the Japanese. And so when their artists worked, many times they signed in Chinese script. They actually signed their name in Chinese on work that looked like Chinese. So this gets it hard to identify sometimes whether it's Chinese or Japanese on early pieces.
That's the mystique of Orientalia, I guess. And now, Korean work is closely related to the Chinese or the Japanese.
Well, actually, in the antiqueware, yes, most of it they adopted the Korean techniques and the Korean styles, and most of their work, very early 17th, 16th century, 15th century, was Korean, all in the original, you know, design. And even on other fields of art, they would take, and sometimes they would take that piece of and develop it over the next 100 years even further than the originator of it.
We brought a few books that I think our camera can pick up now to show the different Japanese ceramics and dictionary of Japanese artists and different porcelains, and of course Satsuma. And we'll be back right after a short message with articles on woodblock prints and Satsuma. Welcome back. This portion of the program, we will discuss Japanese woodblock prints, Japanese silks, imare, Satsuma, and an extraordinary piece of Japanese porcelain. Joe, you want to give us a little history on the Japanese prints, woodblock prints?
Yeah, these are our 1920. Oh, sorry, I had to look at it myself. Woodblock prints. Now, the origination of woodblock prints goes back in Japanese history to somewhere between the 13th and 14th century. And to understand what a woodblock print is, I think Kay would have to explain that the artist actually carves out of wood the design and outline and has to carve a different block for each color of wood. And then he uses these to imprint on the paper and press by hand the different colors in the design. Now, the thing that has made him valuable over the years is that he was only able to get about 200 prints per set of wood blocks, so that it's really like a imposed limited edition, so that most of these that are date back to here's Shiggy's, which is a big name in woodblock prints. His prints are virtually non-existent today except for copies that you can find. But this was a greeting card that they printed up that same method using the same old method in about 1920.
About 1920.
And this is the same type of thing, but they can see the work in it. And each color had to have a different block, so that the artist would do the black and then the reds and the blues in each color, and he would have to get them in phase so that they all matched up.
And this would be a very costly and time
Oh yeah,
consuming.
because, I mean, modern methods of printing are so superior, and other art forms have taken over from this. You still do this sometimes in high schools. They have students, doing
prints. Joe, can you tell us something about the triptych, which is?
Yeah, that came out of a picture book. Now the Japanese did picture books. They had 10 of these. That'd be 30 pages, and they're all wood blocks. These are ladies of the court, and each one in this book was a series of 3 that showed them in various activities in their, their court life. The 3 have been put together, and the book was taken apart, and they mount up as one picture. But each one required a separate set of wood blocks, and this one is done in about 1892, which was near the end of the era when the great woodblock print artists worked. And we have...
you want to pick up the red one?
Yeah, this is a very...
Okay, this is a ceremonial going to the tea garden again, and this was done about the same time, and it depicts the birds and the beautiful weeping willows, and the ladies are very relaxed, and according to their dress, they are ladies of high authority and have a little wealth behind them, and this would be about the same age as the triptych, I believe.
I think an interesting thing that a lot of people have a misnomer about a geisha, but a geisha really was a highly trained entertainer, and her only job was at the tea ceremonies and that to be an entertainer, and they spent their whole life to enjoy this profession.
This is a pair of oils on silk which were done about 1860 in Japan, and they depict the temple and again the gardens, and they're very relaxful, and they were just a pleasure to look, and to see the high color from so long ago is very desirable. We'll move on to, Joe has bought a beautiful piece of Japanese porcelain, which is extremely rare, and we'll start by showing you the stand.
Well, now the stand was made for this, and it's all hallmarked, and I don't know if the camera can pick that up, but this was done for that vase. The vase was made in 1879. There are 2 others that sit in the Victoria and Albert Museum as part of the historical collection. It's fully signed by the artist and the date and the potter and the painter, and it was done in Tokyo at the Hyochin Gardens, which was like a famous art studio. And it's the type of thing that the Japanese liked themselves. They were very popular with the hunting falcon, what you see on the front of the vase, and of course their flowers and birds. And
just beautiful.
And this would have been used in a palace for flower arranging.
Could you show us the bottom of the vase for the signatures and the different, and then maybe turn the vase a little bit, Joe, so they can see all the high colors and the relief and the, it's almost like enameling in certain portions. Just beautiful, the different techniques that are used on this. Okay. Here's a piece of Imari from about 1870.
Well, Imari got its name not by the technique or anything else how it's made, but by the port of Imari. most of this ware back in that period was made in various small kilns around the country and shipped to Amari. And so when it came into Europe, everybody referred to it as Amari, and this is where it's got its name. The actual product itself, which, you know, you look at the blues and reds, were Chinese in origin. And they now have pieces that people pick up and say, oh, this is Chinese Amari. Well, really, you know, couldn't be. It comes from China. It didn't come from Amari, but it is the same type. One thing, all Amari is perfect porcelain. If you listen to the ring of that, and you can make a giant, you know, church bell out of it. And this is still quite popular. It's very decorative. It's great use with English furniture and that type of thing. They made various shapes. They made pieces like this, and if the camera can, I don't know if they
can pick up the charger and the
small, big charger over there,
and the other bowl. Now we'll show a few fine examples of Satsuma. And this is a magnificent example.
Well, as I told you in the beginning, Kay, this piece of Satsuma dates before the emperor came into power again. This was done strictly for the Japanese. This was for their own edification. This is their type of Satsuma. And it's done with some gold, but with the flowers, and the shape is very unusual. And this is signed by the artist and was done about 1830. And I would show you now, this, in other words, is the kind of thing that we don't find too much here because it wasn't made for export. This probably came over from a Japanese family who emigrated. This is more, this next piece that you just handed me, this is the type of thing that was exported. This is what we like.
Yes.
Now this happened to show a burial. I didn't realize it did.
They exported most of their articles to France and England before it came to the United States?
Yeah, England was probably one of the biggest places that, and that's why so many of these things are still found in England, and people who go there bring back a lot of Japanese artifacts. They were used by the English as decorative. And now this is a little later piece. That piece that you just took away was done probably around 1870 or 80. Okay. And this piece would be more in the 20th century, 1910, 1920. And again, they've gone back to, in this one, using their strictly forms and flowers. Now, one thing about Satsuma, all Satsuma has a fine crackle glaze. If you look at that, you see the crackle?
Yes.
Okay, well, you have to understand Satsuma was really first a Korean ware. And the Prince of Satsuma, which is a province in Japan, went to Korea and brought back potters. And they worked for him, and they developed this.
Okay, we'll continue this portion where you can finish the explanation in a few minutes, and then we'll come back with our wonderful world of cloisonne. Thank you. Welcome back. Joe, you were talking about the Prince of Satsuma.
Yes, as I said, he brought Korean workers over to make pottery for himself. And those people and their heirs and relatives have stayed on and are still there and integrated as part of the Japanese.
Okay, now we have a few beautiful examples of kutani.
Now this is early kutani. The work looks very similar to Satsuma.
Yes.
They used a single hair brush and painted it. The only basic difference is this is on a porcelain base rather than on the pottery base with the crackle that the Satsuma was. And we've got another piece over there that is also, these two are not typical of kutani. The next piece after this that you're going to show us is more typical of what we know today and see more of. And the iron red is very, typical of kutani, and we see a lot of this. I don't think the camera can pick that up. So Kutani is the name of an area in Japan, actually a town. And again, most of the kilns were located in the hills around the town, and these pieces were fed into the town and got its name Kutani, and they signed it on the bottom as Kutani. It's coming from that area.
From that particular area. Well, I think everybody's waiting for the cloisonne, so we'd like to show one of a pair of probably the finest, are they temple jars, Joe? Or?
These were probably made for, to be a palace or one of the noblemen, and a pair was made, and they again were used as decorative pieces, and they set on big teak stands and were quite impressive. One thing I want to give you a little background, maybe the people aren't aware, that cloisonne is actually, they take a metal body, solder wires on, fill it with enamel, fire it, and each enamel sets up a different temperature, so this piece they probably fired maybe 40 times, and then polish it all out. And the word cloisonne comes from cloisons, which are the hollow places that the wire creates, and are filled with the enamel. In the French it's a French word. Now these are a pair, and these date about 1880, and again they're done in the cloisonne enamels with the brass wires, and you have the what's called fish scale, where they use a foil behind the back of it. Now we've got.
And this is, most of this was done on brass or bronze?
Well, most of these were done on brass. They worked on silver, brass, copper, and gold. Gold is quite rare. Gold would be quite valuable to find a piece of gold. Now this again was brass wires. This was done probably around 1870, 1880. As I said, most of the things that we're going to look at.
Oh,
now,
I really didn't do that.
This one
is
what is called goldstone.
Goldstone
They
crushed.
used gold underneath, and they used silver wires and did the birds, and I don't know if they can pick up. You can't see, the wires are so fine. Now silver wire cloisonne is about 3 times as hard to make as the brass that we just looked at, and the reason being that silver melts at such a low temperature that they have to be so careful. Now this is a silver wire piece again. I don't know if you can find where that dragon's head is. There, I think. I don't know if they can get him or not, but.
Well, the colors in that are outstanding. Just a beautiful, beautiful piece.
Now this piece here was signed by the artist on the bottom.
Could you show us?
Yeah, the signature. I don't know if you can. But believe it or not, if you promise not to laugh, I'll tell you his name.
Okay.
Mo.
Mo?
Yeah,
Oh,
it really is.
That's it, Mo.
You promised. And now this again is silver wire, but you can see this is typical of the Japanese, using the birds and the flowers. These pieces have become the most desirable today. Silver wire with a plain shiny back, or the blue like this one, are about the biggest collectible in cloisonne right now.
Could you show us a piece of tree bark, Joe? I think you have.
Yeah, this is tree bark. This is done on porcelain, and they did this tree bark and used the wires and filled it with enamel. And another example of porcelain is this piece here. Okay, this is also done in porcelain. This is done on a porcelain that's similar to the Imari over there, but they've done it, and you can see the wires and filled it. Now this was only made from 10 years, from about 1880 to 1890, and it was too fragile. They no longer produced it.
We have a little pair of
yeah, these are what
blue.
I think. These are my favorites. These are just beautiful. These are little. And these again are done in the foil underneath the enamel. And in Oriental things, a pair are usually opposites. They're not alike. In Oriental, a pair are 2 different things. Anything they're alike are not a pair to them.
That's right. Could you show us the little picture that...
Yeah, now this again is porcelain, and it's similar to that tree bark piece we looked at. However, this is just a smooth finish done in black, and this is a little picture.
And this is just beautiful. And it has, like, almost looks, I hate to say Canton, but it has the Canton look of it there. And this is throne pottery, too, isn't it?
Oh, yeah.
Before they do that. And again, the signatures. To sum up, Joe, would you say that the Japanese art today is valuable because of the antiquity or because of the beauty of the piece, regardless of the age?
Well, I think because most of the antique, or so-called antique art we find of Japanese is late, and the finest work they did was like 1900, 1890, that it has much more value because of the work in it than the antiquity. Some of these pieces run a lot of money.
All right. Well, Thank you for joining us on Backstage Antiques, and I want to thank my guest, Joe Keller from Toby House. Joe, this was a very interesting show.
Well, thank you, Kay.
Please join me next when Backstage Antiques will feature our first studio audience, which will be scheduled April 18th. To reserve your seat, please call Riverside Brookfield High School at 442-7500, extension 16, between 1 and 4 p.m., Monday through Friday. Be sure you tell us what you're going to bring, and we hope to hear from you soon. Thank you.